Okay, so let's talk about our favorite science fiction films of the 2010s, since this is a little broader of a category.
Yes, this is obviously non-superhero science fiction movies, so...
Which a lot of the best science fiction films of the 2010s, unfortunately, were superhero movies, so this made it a little bit more difficult to narrow down. What's your number 10?
And I will preface this by saying, for sci-fi and action, I haven't watched as much of those, or rather, I don't have as much of a all-encompassing perspective on those categories, so just remember that these lists are highly, highly subjective.
Yeah, action I narrowed down to my top 5, so I'm sure that's going to be an issue once we get to it. So what's your number 10 for science fiction films?
Number 10, science fiction. This one wasn't really popular, but I liked it. Independence Day Resurgence.
Why? It's like one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
No, I didn't think it was that bad.
Is Geostorm your number 9, John?
It is not. But here's the thing. Now, this may frighten a lot of people. You may not like this, but I watched the original Independence Day right before seeing this movie, and to me, that movie felt dated and a little too corny for me to take seriously. Like, I liked it, but the tone of it just felt off. It's like this world-ending event, and the president's just like a cowboy going in a plane and everything, and I don't know, it just didn't really register that much with me. And then the sequel, I thought, I mean, it was basically like the first movie, but slightly more serious, and it had more, like, they had better technology, and things looked a little cooler, so, I don't know. I kind of like surface-level details like that. I'm a very aesthetic person. I appreciate things that are visual, so, I don't know. I thought it looked better visually. Obviously, both movies look good, but I thought they did the sci-fi element of it better in the sequel, and I liked the way it left off, where they said, we're not going to just sit around and wait for you to invade us again. We're going to take the fight to you. But no, we're not going to see that.
Okay, so my number 10 is Men in Black 3. Yeah, you probably weren't expecting that, were you?
Well.
Is it higher on your list?
I feel like it might be. Number 9.
Okay. So I'll talk about it briefly because I'm sure you have some thoughts on it. It's a franchise I absolutely love. Even Men in Black International, I didn't hate.
You saw it?
Yeah, I saw it. Well, like after it was released on video, like I saw it on demand. Yeah, I mean, it's not a great movie, but it's like not a terrible movie either. It's an okay movie. I think it gets more hate than it deserves.
I would have rather have seen the crossover with 22 Jump Street than that.
Yeah.
Or 21 Jump Street, whatever.
So Men in Black 3, I think was a pretty strong sequel, like especially since people were expecting the franchise to be over after 2. I think it handled time travel really well. I think Josh Brolin was a great young version of
Josh Brolin.
Yeah, he was really great in that.
He's Cable. He's Stannis. He's young Tommy Lee Jones. He's Jonah Hex. What isn't he?
Yeah. What else? Will Smith's always great. He was great in this. Interesting enough villain. Yeah, I mean, the reason it's not higher on my list is because obviously I think it was like, not as good as the first 2.
Well, I thought it was definitely better than 2. 2 I thought was the weakest.
Well, 2 I think gets a lot of hate. I think they get progressively weaker. That's just me. But
okay.
Yeah. Okay, so number 9. For you, it's Men in Black 3, right?
Correct.
Got anything else to add?
No, not really. I liked the fact that they... Weren't they in Coney Island in the end?
Yes. Yes, they were.
Or in the whole... Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a nice detail. Yeah. It always took place in New York, though.
Yeah, no, the first 2 did, yeah.
Yeah, and Men in Black was originally comics, and they were published by Marvel.
Okay, well, I feel like this isn't a comic book movie. Like, people understand that it's different. Okay, so what's my number 9? So for me, it's Limitless, which is one of these movies that I think was considered to be just this pioneering, really cool movie at the time that really no one has talked about since. It did get a short-lived TV series, which really no one saw. Bradley Cooper was fantastic in the role. The reason it's on my list at all is really because of the concept of the whole thing. Like, if you could have a pill that would instantly make you the smartest person in the world... Right. Ian, that's just a very cool concept on its face. And that led to me thinking for the longest time, what if I had access to this pill? What would I do? So it really is a movie that stuck with me for this longest time. And you know, it does get cheesy in spots. It feels like a mid 2000s movie at spots, but you know, it's just something that I really do enjoy.
You know, I did come across that while looking for stuff to put on the list, and I thought about including it, but the fact that the only sci-fi element really was just a pill kept me from putting it there. But
yeah, I know and there's some he's like higher on my list that's sort of toe the line between sci-fi and not, which I feel like I'm gonna get some flack for this if anyone's really like listening critically.
Well, no, it's fine. Sci-fi is a really broad topic.
Yeah, exactly.
But generally, because like I said, I'm all about aesthetics. I pick movies that are visually very sci-fi-esque. And
Limitless does have a lot of that, or a fair amount at least. Like anytime he sort of flashes and, you know, feels the need to get out of a situation.
No, I didn't even think about it like that.
Yeah. Okay, so number 8.
My number 8, Star Trek Into Darkness. Now, this movie got, of course, criticism because of redoing the whole Khan thing and how they tried to cover it up and say, oh no, it's this guy John Harrison, but no one bought that.
Yeah, obviously it was Khan. Like, they cast Benedict Cumberbatch, people knew it was Khan.
Yeah. But the main thing I liked about it was all the interactions between the main cast and the crew. I thought everybody had their moment, because I hadn't actually seen the original series at the time, but now after having seen the original series, I do see elements reminiscent of their characters in the show. Like, I see it there, and I liked the whole, I don't know, adventure aspect of it. I don't know, what really can you say about Star Trek Into Darkness? It's a J.J. Abrams Star Trek. It's a big action movie. Guy wants revenge. It's fun. It's entertaining.
What I'm wondering is how many other Star Trek movies are going to be on your top 10?
That actually is the only one. Because the only other one was Beyond.
Right? Yeah.
Right. And
well, I guess the original came out in 2009, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Which, for me, I think that was actually the best movie in this whole J.J. Abrams franchise. I know he didn't direct the
first
last one. Yeah, I really like the original. That's just me, but
I don't know. Tough to say for me whether I like it more than Into Darkness.
So my number 8 is sort of an obscure one. So this was a movie starring Jason Sudeikis in the main role. Anne Hathaway was the female lead. It's called Colossal. Mm-hmm. Does it ring any bells, or should I
explain a little bit?
Okay, so it's this really sort of weird movie made by this director who I think is Scandinavian, who no one really expected to like. It's a weird movie on its face. The guy who directed it is named Nacho Vigalondo. This was like his first movie with actual actors in it. And it sort of like asks the question, what would happen if a young girl could control a monster in Japan while like walking around in a sandbox in her hometown? It's like just one of these weird like gems that just people completely ignored.
For some reason that almost rings a bell. I don't know. There's like a little hint of a neuron firing in my brain that might remember something like that. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a movie I really enjoy just because it does have these like Jason Sudeikis is obviously a great comic actor. He's fantastic in it. Dan Stevens, who like became famous for starring as what's his name, David Haller in Legion. He's fantastic in that too, even though he isn't in sort of a small role. And you know, it's like she does like sort of inhabit this role. Like she eventually does realize, oh, hey, I'm controlling this monster accidentally. What the heck do I do? How can I stop it from attacking? I think it's actually Korea, not Japan. But yeah, no, it's just a very cool movie that I think people need to see.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Yeah.
So speaking of Japanese-inspired properties, number 7, and I think you won't be surprised that this is on my list, Elita Battle Angel.
I should have put this on my list. I was like struggling for a point to put it on. And actually, you know, I might amend this and put that higher on, actually.
Yeah. And I have it there for a couple reasons. One of which being the fact that it explores this idea of someone who's essentially all robot, but I'm pretty sure she has a human brain. It's like,
well, she's a cyborg, technically, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a human brain, but everything else is robotic. So it's kind of exploring the idea of this personhood of somebody who was essentially built as a war machine, but then discarded, and then finding her own new purpose in some world that she barely recognizes, but slowly begins to pick up the pieces of her past and use it to kind of shape the way she goes about her future. And that's something I think that's pretty relatable, finding purpose. And another of the reasons it's there is because of the whole world building aspect of it. When you see these flashbacks from some kind of war, we're not really sure what it is, but it's something they could definitely get into if they made more of them, especially since it ends off with her traveling to the, Elysium type city in the sky.
Right.
And it makes me want to see more.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I get that. Okay, so what's my number 7? So my number 7 is The World's End, which is Edgar Wright's last movie in the Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy, along with Shaun of the Dead. And the first movie was what was the first movie? Shaun of the Dead, the first movie? Yeah, Shaun of the Dead was the first movie. Then it was Hot Fuzz, which is actually, like, in my opinion, the best movie of the trilogy, which no one talks about. So The World's End is this sort of borderline apocalyptic movie. The apocalypse comes in place during the very end of it. I feel like The World's End sort of gives it that away. And, it's basically this whole story, which I didn't know going in. And, in retrospect, it seems kind of obvious. But it's about these guys who go back to their hometown to go on this massive drink tour of, like, all 12 of their hometown's bars. And as they're going through this whole, they're doing a drink at each one of these bars and going through. I think by the time they get to the second or third bar, they realize most of the citizens of this town have been replaced by alien robots. And it's fucking fantastic. It's like it doesn't work on paper, but, it's Edgar Wright. Of course it works. Okay, so what is your number 6, is it? I think it's 6.
We're up to number 6. I have, and this is a movie we already mentioned, Edge of Tomorrow. Why? Because it's Groundhog Day, but with Tom Cruise and fighting monsters with mech-like attachments on your body that, I don't know, partially looks like Halo, partially looks like Titanfall. It is based off of a Japanese graphic novel called All You Need Is Kill, and I thought it was a really cool concept, executed decently well. And the fact that it's sort of like a video game, like Dark Souls, where he goes and fights the same enemies in the same situations over and over and has to master the movements and memorize exactly what to do until he finally just, like, gives up. And so, yeah, I thought it was a solid sci-fi action flick, deserving of a spot.
So I will say, I'm sort of amending my list as I'm going through it here. My number 6 actually probably would be Elita Battle Angel, and the reason I didn't include it, like, earlier on is because, the ending sort of rubbed me the wrong way. It's obviously looking for a sequel, and it sort of feels like it wouldn't stand alone on its own without that sort of present-mindedness of a sequel. I feel like it could have ended a lot earlier and have been a better movie. But, obviously Rosa Salazar is great in the role. Robert Rodriguez is a fantastic director who obviously I have this huge childhood love of just from watching Spy Kids growing up. And, from, like, watching Machete and stuff while I was in college. Yeah, but, so Elita Battle Angel is my official number 6. I'm revising my list midway through here.
Alrighty then. So number 5... No, that was 6. Okay, so number 5. I have another Tom Cruise movie, Oblivion. And for anybody who hasn't seen that, it's this post-apocalyptic type movie where Tom Cruise is... I don't quite remember, but he's sort of like a caretaker or scavenger of this... Okay, I remember. So the premise is that everyone's moved to Jupiter's moon Titan because Earth is no longer inhabitable, and he's kind of like the cleanup crew. He gathers data, information that they need or whatever, and is supposed to eventually go back to Jupiter's moon Titan. But as you eventually find out, he's just a clone commissioned by this AI entity who essentially just has these humans here to feed it information. For what purpose, I don't exactly remember, but it was an interesting concept, again, exploring personhood of somebody who's essentially just a copy of somebody who did live and was repurposed. And, he ends up starting a new life with the other female clone. They start a family and everything. Or he, finds a family of a different clone. And, it's got Morgan Freeman and very nice landscapes, nice vistas, and pretty cool movie.
Cool.
It's Tom Cruise. How can you go wrong?
Yeah, so my number 5 would be Ready Player One, which I think, first of all, is Steven Spielberg's best movie since the 90s. It's one of these movies that I think flew under the radar for a lot of people. We actually did a review on it, a low-res review. I think it was number 6 or 7, somewhere in there. It was an early one. So it's just this sort of fantastic movie about, and you know, I don't know if you ever read Epic or Saga, like these books that take place in alternate reality, but essentially it follows this plot line of what would happen if the world was basically shit and all you could do to escape was go to this virtual reality worlds that pretty much everyone inhabited. There's a lot of 80s nostalgia that works really well. You know, there's a lot of homage to 80s culture that works really well. Ty Sheridan, who also played Cyclops in the younger X-Men movies like Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, he's Cyclops. He was fantastic in this. I think it's the best performance he's ever given. And yeah, I mean, it's just one of these movies that, you know, it doesn't have a lot to say, but what it does say is it does offer you an escape. It does offer you this sort of sense of fun that we really don't see in a lot of sci-fi. You know, it's not like this. It leaves you off with a hopeful message, and you know, it just works really well. All right,
moving on to number 4, I have Interstellar, also known as the modern version of 2001: Space Odyssey. I don't know if I totally believe the fact that his daughter just comes up with everything. She's like, "Oh, I got it. I know what we have to do to..."
Yeah, it's a little weird.
What was it? An equation to, I guess, figure out how to manipulate gravity or something?
Yeah, something like... It's a weird movie. And yeah, some of those elements really just don't work for me. The whole idea of a black hole, and this is something that Neil deGrasse Tyson actually picked apart, he did this whole collaboration with CinemaSins, which was actually kind of awesome, where he picks apart the science of the whole thing. And black holes don't work that way. And they just completely skittish over that.
Well, it wasn't really a black hole, right? That was the thing. It wasn't really a black hole. It looked like one, but it was really, I don't know, some kind of higher dimensional construct by future humans, we're led to believe, in order for him to be able to, you know, manipulate past events and clue everyone into where to go in order to lead humanity to salvation or to a better place.
Okay.
That's how I took it. Like, it's not, This isn't a natural black hole. It was artificially created.
Right.
So
okay. I mean, I didn't get that at the time.
That's how I
don't know. It's something that I probably should rewatch, but it's just one of the movies that I thought was one of Christopher Nolan's rare missteps. That's just me. Number 4 for me is actually a tie between two of my favorite horror movies of the decade, both of which do sort of play with science fiction concepts. So A Quiet Place and Get Out. I talked about Get Out during our horror episode. I think I might have touched upon A Quiet Place too. So without getting too deep into it, Get Out sort of plays with like body modification and hypnosis. In the more sort of fictional way, because the way they portray hypnosis doesn't really jive with how hypnosis actually works. Quiet Place really centers around aliens, the use of sound. They're both very science fiction-y movies that are like very clearly horror movies. And I think they're both like just really fantastic movies that I really don't want to spoil too much about. So yeah, check them out.
Number 3 for me is another Nolan movie, which you probably have figured out just by saying that. Inception.
Yeah, so this is spoiler alert, this is my number 1 choice.
Oh, wow.
Probably don't need to say why since you're going to get into it, but go ahead.
So, of course, very interesting concept, being able to actually manipulate not just your own dreams, but other people's dreams, going into someone's mind and using the whole dream construct as a way of extracting information. And of course, like I always say, the visual element is incredible. You see all the landscapes and buildings morphing around them and whatnot. And there's this whole present danger that if you stay in there too long, if you go too deep, too many layers down, you'll never be able to tell the difference between what's a dream and what's reality. And, you know, that, of course, that can lead you to do crazy things, as we eventually see.
Yeah, well said. I will say Leo DiCaprio should have won the Oscar for that one. It's ridiculous that they had to wait for The Revenant, which actually probably should have gone on my action films list, but I didn't think to put it on. Okay, so my number 3 is Blade Runner 2049, which we saw together, but you slept through, so I can understand why it's not on your list.
Yeah.
Look, I love Blade Runner. I love the original movie. Blade Runner 2049 for me was a better movie. Partially because you have this sort of younger replicant trying to search for his identity. It's sort of the reason I forget what the movie we were talking about earlier was already, but it's like sort of playing with this concept of the self. Like, at what point does a human become a machine? And my number two
Elita.
pick, Elita, yes, exactly, yeah. For what it's worth, my number two movie also plays with that same theme. I'll talk about that once we get there, but yeah. So that's part of it. Part of it is because it's rarity that Hollywood actually turns out a sequel that's as good, if not better, than the original, especially like 30 years after the fact. Mm-hmm. So it was really incredible for me. The cinematography is unlike anything I've ever seen. I think it was just phenomenal from this whole perspective. So yeah, I mean, this is a movie that, first of all, see Blade Runner, but see Blade Runner 2049. It just works really well for me.
I'm going to go ahead and spoil my honorable mention, which was going to be Blade Runner 2049. And yeah, I know when I first saw it, I didn't gather all of it because I think at that point I hadn't like slept in over a day. So, you know, I was in and out, but I was there for most of it. And from what I could tell, at least with the visual aspect, and this was no small feat, it was just as good as the original. And, you know, recreating that kind of aesthetic is not easy, as we can clearly tell when they keep trying to make new Terminator movies, whether they're exactly trying to copy James Cameron or not. They just haven't been able to get it right. But 2049, I thought, really did get that whole feel and look of it right.
Yeah, I will say before we conclude the lists here, and you know, we'll get to number two next, but the reason I didn't include any Terminator films or Star Wars films on this list, and I feel like, you know, you have these two fantastic franchises which at their core were some of the best science fiction of all time. Really no Terminator movie or Star Wars movie from this past decade really stood out as being a masterpiece to me. And I think you're probably inclined to agree, since I don't think you included Star Wars or Terminator as being any of your next couple.
You would be right.
Yeah. And so what's your number two?
My number two, I was going to say, you know, we've had 5 Star Wars movies in the last decade. Isn't that crazy?
And none of them have been particularly great.
And none of them make a top 10.
I still haven't seen Solo, you realize, you know?
Yeah, Solo's all right.
Yeah. But no, I actually enjoyed pretty much all of them. It's just none of them are exceptional movies, in my opinion. None of them really blow me away.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So, number two, and if you know a particular detail about me, about a certain thing that I like, which is large mech robots, then this choice will make sense to you. Pacific Rim.
Wow.
Need I say more? It's giant.
It's high praise.
I think is it the first like Western movie we've seen with giant mech robots actually done really well?
Well, I guess done really well in terms of box office gross, or done really well in terms of just been a good movie. I actually never saw the Pacific Rim, so I can't comment too much on it. But I
can't think of any other movie with big mechs other than maybe
Transformers.
Godzilla would be. Yeah, but see, those are robots though; they're not controlled by people. Which I guess, I don't know if that's a requirement to being a mech, technically, but yeah, no, I just thought it was great action sci-fi, great visuals, of course, because you had the direction of, and I'm going to get his name right this time, Guillermo del Toro.
Oh yeah, I forgot he was behind that. I really should see the original, shouldn't I?
Yes, and unfortunately they didn't have him for the sequel, and I thought it suffered. Not a terrible movie, but just nowhere near as good as the first one.
Okay, so my number two pick, and this is one that I feel like you probably haven't heard of it, but it's one of these sort of indie sci-fi movies that actually has a phenomenal cast, phenomenal direction, just worked really well. And I think if you heard what I just said about the whole idea of what makes you human, this should be kind of obvious. So my number two pick is Ex Machina, which have you seen it, or?
I've seen it, yeah.
Okay, so you can sort of see where I'm going with this. So I just think the whole concept of humanity, like what makes us human, what makes machines machines, at what point does a machine become human, at what point does your thought become independent, that's just something that really blows me away, and it's part of the reason why Fallout 4 is one of my favorite video games, you know? Mm-hmm. So Ex Machina does it exceptionally well. Alicia Vikander obviously is a human actress, but she plays the part of a machine trying to become human better than anything you could possibly imagine. To the point that you can tell the characters in this movie are starting to believe that she's actually human.
Right.
Not actually, but actually exhibiting sort of free will, and you know, she does eventually.
Yeah, you see all of them start to look at her because she's like the only one who actually begins to show or exhibit these behaviors of self-interest, right?
Yeah, it's incredible. And you could make the argument that Oscar Isaac's character did sort of program her to sort of behave this way. And it's just so well done. It's such a cool concept. Go see Ex Machina.
Yeah, this is probably the one movie where you would understand if Poe Dameron was talked down to by a female.
Yep.
Also, he's Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Remember that, everybody?
Yeah, so I already did give away my number one, so please elaborate on yours.
All right, so my number one, this might be a little controversial, and I don't technically think it's the best quality story on this list, but I put it there for a reason. One being because, to reiterate again, aesthetics, big thing for me, and because I want to see more of it, and because, as I speak, it's the desktop background of all three of my monitors, Tron Legacy.
Oh, that's a weird one. That's a deep cut, actually.
That one, again, also kind of explores the whole personhood thing. Obviously, you have this cyber world that's been growing for the last 28 years, since it was 28 years since the first movie back in 81? No. Tron Legacy was 2010, so what was it? I guess 82 is when Tron came out.
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Verify. 1982, yes. So it builds up this world where these programs exist, and programs have a specific purpose. It's like, they do one job, and then you had these other entities up here called ISOs. That was what they were short for. I don't remember the long name, but they're these digital entities that Jeff Bridges, who's like the god of this world because he created it, explains that they just started to pop up out of nowhere, and they didn't, like programs, have a specific purpose. They had free will, essentially. And then you had Clue, who was made in Jeff Bridges' image. He was meant to bring like order to the whole universe here. I'm not sure how you would equate that to a program, but he's essentially made to be the president or the leader of everything.
He's the programmer.
Yes, he's like the master control. You had the master control program in the first movie. This was different. But anyway, he sees them as a threat because he can't control them, and so he brings about this whole like dictatorship to eradicate them. And then, of course, when he finds out about the portal into the real world, he wants to go there, and they have to stop him. But yeah, so interesting story, interesting concept. Goes without saying, the whole visual style of it, very cool. Of course, it was a throwback to the 80s, and we like the 80s here. So yeah. Disney, make 3. Make 3, Disney.